easy one as a warm-up. Is Prince Harry happy with his new life in California?
Ish. I'd say half and half. He'd love to be able to be both in California and have great status in Britain. And the lack of any status in Britain and diminishing status in California means that I think on the whole, he's pretty frustrated.
We're going to come to the rather perilous state of their respective careers in the public eye. Can I ask for your appraisal of the health of their marriage?
Now, the 38-year-old Prince Harry is telling his own story in a new memoir coming out Tuesday called Spare, a nod to his backup role in the line of succession. The book is a stunning break with royal protocol. It's a deeply personal account of Prince Harry's decades-long struggle with grief after the death of his mother, Princess Diana, and a revealing look at his fractured relationships with his father, King Charles, his stepmother, the Queen Consort Camilla, and his brother, Prince William, the heir to his spare.
In the gilded corridors of the British monarchy, it is often said that what you do not know cannot hurt you. But in the age of global media and digital footprints, the past has a way of rising from the grave just when it seems buried deeply enough. For nearly a decade, one man has remained the silent guardian of what is described as the real Meghan Markle story. Trevor Engelson, the Hollywood producer who was once the central architect of Meghan's life in Los Angeles, has long been treated as nothing more than a footnote in the royal fairy tale, a starter marriage that was supposed to disappear the moment a tiara was placed on her head. But that quiet period is said to be over. Reports suggest that Engelson has reached a breaking point and is no longer willing to remain invisible. This is not being framed as an ex-husband chasing money or attention. It is being presented as the actions of a man who believes he was deliberately erased and professionally sabotaged by the woman he once loved. When Meghan moved on to Toronto and later to London, Trevor was allegedly left with returned wedding rings and a career that suddenly seemed to be under pressure. For years, he watched as the public story of the Duchess of Sussex was carefully built into the image of a self-made woman, a humanitarian, and a victim of a cold and rigid institution. But those who knew Trevor during the marriage are said to believe that he saw a very different side of her. Now, according to these reports, he is preparing to come forward with a dossier of evidence that could cut through the center of the Sussex brand. This is being described not as a simple disclosure, but as a declaration of war, and the target is not only Meghan's reputation. The target is the foundation of her standing with the crown itself. He is no longer said to be speaking merely to tabloids. Instead, he is allegedly preparing to present his findings directly to the palace, acting against a public image that he claims was built on omission after omission. The question then becomes, what kind of information could be so damaging that it would shake Buckingham Palace itself? The answer, according to this narrative, begins with a chapter of Meghan's life that came long before Hollywood, before Suits, and certainly before St. George's Chapel. For years, whispers have circulated in the darker corners of the internet claiming that Meghan's marriage to Trevor was not her second marriage, but her third. The theory reaches back to her time at Northwestern University in the late 90s, when a 19-year-old Meghan was reportedly involved in a short, impulsive, and ultimately buried first marriage. If such a claim were ever proven true, it would not be seen as some small, youthful scandal or a simple mistake from the past. It would be viewed as a devastating failure of the royal vetting process, a system that is supposed to be among the strictest background checks in the world. When a commoner marries into the direct line of succession, every aspect of that person's past is meant to be examined. Legal experts, royal historians, and the upper levels of British security services are expected to uncover every secret, every debt, and every previous legal union in order to preserve the stability of the crown. That is why the question becomes so serious. If such a union existed, how could it have gone unnoticed? One explanation being suggested is that the marriage may have been annulled or may have taken place in another country, with the record later sealed or removed from public view. One royal legal expert is said to have noted that the monarchy is built on precedent and, above all, trust. If Meghan entered the royal family while concealing a previous legal union from the Queen and from the British government, it would not be seen merely as a forgotten omission. It would be viewed as deliberate deceit directed at the state itself. Trevor Engelson is reportedly said to know the details of this earlier connection and to be prepared to produce evidence that British intelligence services either failed to discover or were encouraged to overlook. To understand why that would matter so much, it is necessary to understand how royal security and vetting work. The process for approving a royal spouse is not presented as a casual background check. It is described as a deep forensic investigation into a person's digital, financial, and legal history. For someone like Meghan, coming from a career in Hollywood, that scrutiny should, according to the claims being made here, have been even stronger than usual. It should have involved an enhanced security review, not a relaxed one. Yet rumors from inside palace circles suggest that Harry's team at the time pushed hard to move the process more quickly. Harry is described as having been so protective and so eager to shield his future wife from intense investigation that normal procedures may have been bypassed. That possibility creates what is being described as a major legal loophole for King Charles. If Trevor's dossier were to contain evidence of a sealed marriage record from Illinois or California that was never declared, then the royal wedding would no longer appear as a harmless fairy tale. It would become a breach of trust involving the sovereign. This is why the matter is framed as more than a paperwork problem. It is being presented as a vulnerability at the heart of the institution. A woman with a hidden past is described here as someone who could, in theory, be subject to manipulation or blackmail by outside forces. In that reading, Meghan would not merely have protected her image, she would have created a national security issue for the British state by keeping such a past hidden. That is the threat Trevor is said to be holding over the palace, proof that the monarchy itself was deceived at the highest level. But as serious as the marriage allegation is, the transcript moves to a second accusation that is framed as carrying even greater moral weight. According to these claims, the rumors of a secret first marriage are tied to a far darker suggestion, the existence of a child from that early union. Anonymous sources and fragments of supposed evidence have, for years, pointed toward the claim that there was a daughter who was either given up for adoption or placed in an orphanage so that a young actress could pursue her rising ambitions without interference. Names such as Joseph Goldberg Giuliano are said to have appeared repeatedly in these theories, alongside references to birth records from the early 2000s that have never been publicly explained in a way that satisfied those pushing the allegation. The mainstream media, according to the transcript, has largely ignored these claims and dismissed them as baseless tabloid material. But Trevor Engelson is described as the one person, apart from Meghan herself, who would have been in a position to hear the truth during the years of their marriage. That is what gives this rumor its weight in the story being told here. If any part of it were true, it would not simply damage Meghan's image. It would completely overturn the identity she has built for herself in public life. Her speeches about Archie and Lily, her accounts of motherhood, her pregnancies, and even her losses have all become central to her brand. She has presented herself as a deeply protective and compassionate mother. The revelation of a firstborn child left behind in the pursuit of ambition would, in this telling, transform that image entirely, replacing sympathy with a sense of deceit that would be difficult to overcome. For Prince Harry, the emotional consequences of such a revelation are described as enormous. He is presented as a man who has made the protection of his family central to his identity, someone still marked by the trauma of losing his own mother when he was young. To discover that the woman for whom he gave up so much may have made the opposite choice with a child of her own would, in this narrative, become the ultimate betrayal. It would not simply challenge his public position. It would force him to question who his wife really is and whether the life he built around her rests on truths or on secrets he never fully understood. The next allegation shifts from secrecy to character, and it is framed in the transcript as one of the most dangerous parts of the entire story. The phrase that has reportedly become a nightmare for the Sussex public relations team is the idea of a dirty yacht past. This accusation is not being described as a harmless reference to a young person attending parties or moving through glamorous social circles. Instead, it is presented as a claim about the core of Meghan's ambition and the methods she allegedly used to climb through Hollywood before she ever secured a role on television. According to the narrative being laid out, Trevor Engelson's dossier includes details of a period when Meghan was supposedly a regular presence on luxury boats in the Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf. In those circles, networking is portrayed as a polite term for something far more transactional. The environment is described as one where powerful bankers, major businessmen, and influential global figures exchange opportunities for companionship, and Trevor is said to possess first-hand information, photographs, guest lists, and witness testimony that paint a picture of Meghan as a woman, prepared to do whatever was necessary to get close to power. What gives this allegation force in the transcript is not only the scandal attached to it, but the way it directly collides with the image Meghan now presents. She has positioned herself publicly as a feminist, a woman of seriousness and substance, and someone who rose through determination, hard work, and talent. If her rise was in fact accelerated by relationships or associations that stand in direct contradiction to those values, then the entire public identity built around those principles would collapse. That is why the issue is framed as so useful to the royal family. The monarchy, as described here, has spent decades trying to distance itself from the sleaze of the 1990s and from scandals linked to transactional relationships. The image of a duchess tied to those same circles would not merely create embarrassment, it would provide a simple, easily understood reason for the palace to move quickly. In that version of events, the matter stops being a celebrity dispute and becomes a crisis of integrity and character that touches the institution itself. From there, the transcript moves into another part of Meghan's past that is presented as equally important, though in a different way. Before she was a duchess, she was known as a lifestyle blogger. Her site, The Tig, served as a kind of digital diary where she curated an image of herself as polished, worldly, sophisticated, and well-traveled. When she later met Harry, that site was scrubbed from public view. For most people, that might have looked like a perfectly standard step taken for privacy once royal life entered the picture. But according to the transcript, digital forensic experts believe the erasure was much more precise than an ordinary deletion. It is suggested that the removal of the site was surgical, not casual, and that Trevor reportedly has access to the raw material from that period, including unpublished drafts and archived data that could show what the public was not supposed to see. Those reported TIG archives are described as extremely revealing because they allegedly document a woman already engaged in the process of pruning and redesigning her own history long before London or the monarchy ever came into the picture. The claim is that these files contain traces of associations, ambitions, and patterns of behavior that do not align with the image of the reluctant royal she later adopted. Rather than showing a woman who happened into a fairy tale by chance, the archives are presented as offering a blueprint for reinvention. They are said to reveal a methodical use of people, opportunities, and platforms in the pursuit of rising social status. If those materials were ever released, the implication would be that Meghan's entry into the royal family was not an accidental love story, but the final act in a carefully shaped and long-running performance. The pressure created by those possible disclosures is said to have already crossed the threshold of the Sussex home in Montecito. For years, Harry and Meghan have maintained a united front, presenting themselves as a pair standing shoulder to shoulder against the world. That us against them narrative has been central to their public identity and has helped keep supporters loyal. But now, according to the transcript, cracks are reportedly beginning to show. Insiders are said to believe that the once solid image is starting to fracture as the weight of what Harry may not have known begins to grow heavier. Reports are described of a major argument between the couple, a confrontation in which Harry allegedly demanded the truth about the omissions in Meghan's past. That moment matters in the story because Harry is not being depicted as someone who made a small sacrifice for love. He is shown as someone who gave up almost everything: his military titles, his home, his role within the institution, and even his country, all because he believed he was protecting his wife from forces he saw as hostile and predatory. But the transcript asks what happens if those hostile forces are not inventing a false story at all, but are simply exposing truths from her own past. In that case, the entire meaning of Harry's decisions changes. That is why this part of the story becomes psychological rather than merely political or scandalous. Harry is said to be moving through a minefield built not by the press or by palace officials, but by the possibility that the life he defended was never fully what he believed it to be. His departure from the royal family was framed publicly as an act of protection, a way of saving his wife from the same kind of media cruelty he has long blamed for his mother's death. But if the attacks on Meghan are not simply the result of a hostile press and are instead responses to a pattern of dishonesty, then the worldview on which Harry based his choices begins to collapse. He is no longer the rescuer in a tragic story. Instead, he becomes a man who may have played a role in a far more complicated and carefully constructed rise. The transcript presents this as the beginning of a new type of imprisonment for Harry, a cage built not by royal rules or newspaper headlines, but by secrets he never fully understood. If the foundation of their story together is false, then the future they have tried to build on authenticity, honesty, and personal truth becomes much harder to defend. Their relationship, in this version of events, starts to shift from romance into a space of doubt, suspicion, and blame. The love story is no longer enough to carry the weight of what may emerge. Instead, it becomes the setting for a conflict in which every unanswered question from the past begins to poison the present. At this point in the transcript, the crisis has moved well beyond image management. It is no longer only about what the public may think if old rumors return. It is about what Harry himself may think if those rumors are given structure, evidence, and direct links to Trevor Engelson's account. The story suggests that what is surfacing now is not simply damaging gossip. It is a set of disclosures capable of tearing apart the emotional and moral logic of the life Harry and Meghan built together after leaving the royal family. That is what gives the second section of the story its force. The allegations about yachts and carefully managed social climbing are presented not simply to embarrass Meghan, but to attack the moral basis of her public persona. The TIG archives are not described merely as old blog material, but as records of reinvention and selective erasure, and the argument now rumored to be taking place inside Montecito is not just a marital dispute, but the beginning of a deeper collapse. The transcript frames it as the moment when private history and public branding finally collide, and when the cost of what was hidden begins to fall not only on reputation, but on marriage, trust, and identity itself. While King Charles is the one who ultimately holds the power, the transcript presents the Prince of Wales as the figure leading the push behind the scenes. William is described as someone whose concerns have moved far beyond personal resentment or frustration with the Sussexes' media strategy. What may once have looked like irritation over public interviews and tell all narratives is now framed as a much larger institutional concern. For William and Catherine, the issue is no longer about family drama alone. It is about the future of the monarchy itself and about the burden they may be left to carry if the damage continues unchecked. They are portrayed as the future of the institution, the people who will eventually have to restore order and credibility after the fallout. That is why, according to the transcript, William is believed to be urging his father toward the harshest possible response. He reportedly wants Trevor Engelson's evidence to be used as the basis for permanently severing all legal and titular ties with the Sussexes. The logic behind that alleged push is presented as straightforward. William is said to believe that every day these rumors remain unanswered, the institution suffers another blow. A monarchy that appears to protect or conceal the actions of a member who may have deceived the state during the vetting process is a monarchy that risks losing its legitimacy. In this version of events, the issue has grown far beyond sibling rivalry. William's motivation is framed as protective rather than personal. He is described as acting for the sake of the throne and, more specifically, for the sake of his own children, George, Charlotte, and Louis. He is said to want the Sussex issue sealed off, closed, and neutralized before it can do further harm to the image of the crown. Trevor Engelson's dossier is therefore presented as the exact instrument William needs in order to convince King Charles that mercy has reached its limit and that decisive action is now the only responsible course. At the same time as the Sussexes are depicted as dealing with internal strain and personal conflict, the monarchy itself is described as moving with cold precision. Trevor Engelson's decision to provide information directly to the palace is framed as a turning point because it gives the royal institution something it has allegedly lacked for years: an institutional basis for action that is not emotional, retaliatory, or family-driven. For a long time, King Charles has supposedly had to navigate public opinion very carefully, trying to manage the consequences of Megxit without appearing vindictive or bitter toward his own son. That balancing act becomes much easier, according to the transcript, if Engleson provides the crown with documentary evidence of fundamental deceit during the royal vetting process. In that case, any response taken by the palace would no longer look like a father punishing a son. It would look like the institution correcting a breach committed against its own standards and its own authority. That distinction is central to the way the situation is being framed. If the dossier truly proves that a major deception was carried out during the process that brought Meghan into the royal family, then the king would be seen as having a legal and institutional path to remove the Sussex titles. In that scenario, the action would not be sold to the public as revenge or personal retaliation. It would be cast as a necessary correction, a move designed to preserve the integrity of the crown and restore faith in its standards. The transcript suggests that this is exactly what the monarchy has needed, a fact-based reason for action, not one rooted in hurt feelings or media embarrassment. With such a reason in hand, Charles would be able to frame the decision not as family warfare, but as duty. The legal framework invoked in the transcript is the Titles Deprivation Act of 1917. This law is described as a mechanism that allows the monarch to remove titles from individuals who have acted in a way considered harmful to the interests of the crown. Historically, such a measure has usually been associated with treason or with siding against Britain in wartime. However, the transcript suggests that legal experts believe the definition of acting against the interests of the crown could be interpreted more broadly. In this case, it could be extended to include serious deception at the highest level during the vetting process for a royal marriage. If that interpretation were accepted, then Charles would not merely be disciplining Harry, he would be carrying out what is described as an institutional reset. The consequences of such a move are presented as immediate and enormous. The Sussex brand, which has been built into a multi-million-dollar identity in California, would lose the very foundation that gives it value. Titles that currently anchor their image would disappear, leaving behind only Harry and Meghan as private citizens. In that version of events, the glamour, mystique, and marketable weight attached to the royal connection would vanish overnight. What would remain, according to the transcript, is a couple whose carefully managed past has finally caught up with them. That is why the stakes are framed as so high. This is not merely about a disagreement between family members or a battle of public relations strategies. It is about whether the crown chooses to cut away an entire branch of controversy in order to protect itself. By the final part of the transcript, the story is widened even further. It is no longer described simply as a conflict between an ex-husband and his former wife. Instead, it becomes a reckoning between the polished Sussex image and a past that refuses to stay buried. Meghan is portrayed as a woman who mastered reinvention, moving from Hollywood actress to royal duchess to global humanitarian in a remarkably short span of time. But every structure, no matter how impressive it appears from the outside, depends on the strength of what lies beneath it. If the foundation is built on omissions and secrets, then the collapse was always only a matter of time. That is the larger point being made. The problem is not only what may be revealed, but the possibility that the entire identity was unstable from the beginning. The silence now said to be coming from the Sussex home is treated in the transcript as meaningful in itself. It is described as saying more than any polished public relations statement ever could. Instead of projecting strength, it hints at fractures that may be too deep to repair and at a royal endgame that is finally drawing near. In that atmosphere, each new disclosure becomes more threatening than the last because it suggests that the era in which Meghan's story went largely uncontested may be ending. The transcript presents Trevor Engelson as the person who has opened a door that can no longer be shut. Once opened, the flow of information through that door is said to be changing how the world sees the Duchess. For Prince Harry, the road ahead is painted as lonely and uncertain. He is described as a man who burned every bridge behind him, only to discover that the destination on the other side may not have been what it appeared to be. His choices were total and irreversible. He gave up role, family, and country in defense of a narrative he believed in completely. If that narrative begins to unravel, then what lies ahead for him is not simply public embarrassment, but personal isolation and moral confusion. The story suggests that he may be left facing the possibility that what he defended with such loyalty was built on truths he never fully possessed. For King Charles, the path described is one of duty placed above family. He is presented as a monarch who may soon have to choose not between affection and anger, but between private feeling and public responsibility. If the evidence is as serious as the transcript claims, then his role would be to act not as a father trying to heal division, but as a sovereign protecting the standards of the institution. That would make the coming decision one of obligation, not emotion. And for Meghan, the challenge is framed as the challenge of surviving the truth of her own past. The game, according to the closing of the transcript, is no longer about status, celebrity, Hollywood advancement, or royal titles. It is about truth, and truth is presented as the one thing that cannot be rebranded or reinvented forever. That is where the story ultimately lands. It closes not on certainty, but on the suggestion that something decisive is approaching, that more revelations are still to come, and that the palace may finally be forced to act. The final question left hanging is whether that action will come soon, and whether the institution will choose to bring the Sussex era to a formal end once the dossier is fully revealed.